Good afternoon, everyone who's on the East Coast. If you're on I guess anywhere west of the East Coast, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for Cybersecurity for Lawyers. We have our expert James joining us today. I'd like to thank him for being here. He's put this session together, so he's going to be guiding us through today's show. Before I do pass it off to him, I do have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements to go over. We will have some passwords throughout today's session. When you see those passwords, just write them down. It doesn't matter if you choose the first or the second option. Just make sure you write down all the passwords and you bring them over to the PCI website. When you get there, you go to My Certificate in Courses and you'll put those passwords in to the password survey for today's session. We also have a question section. If you have any kind of technical background questions, I can answer that for you directly in the question section. If it's related to today's content, then James will be able to answer that for you throughout the session. We also do have a PDF version of the handout in the handout section that you'll see right below the question section. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to James. Thank you so much, James.
Oh, thank you, Joshua. So I am Jim Goepel. I'm the Director of Education and Content for a company called FutureFeed. I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit called the CMMC Information Institute. I've done cybersecurity for a couple decades now in different capacities. And so this is stuff that is fun for me to talk about. It's also, I think, just an existential issue for us as a nation. And we as lawyers need to pay attention to cyber because we are really being targeted more than you may even be aware. Your role as the lawyer means that you are handling a lot of very sensitive information, and our adversaries, whether they are organized crime or nation state actors or even just some of the script kiddies that are out there, know that this stuff is that lawyers get that kind of sensitive information. They are smart. And so the more you can do to protect yourself means that you're actually helping protect your clients as well. And we'll go through some of those obligations that we're starting to see. We're getting more and more obligations imposed on us as lawyers, and even the companies that you represent are seeing more and more obligations in the way of laws, regulations, et cetera. So you really need to make sure that you are paying attention to cyber, even if you're a real estate attorney, even if you're doing things that don't touch on IT. The world now is powered by computers, and cyber is at its core. So we really need to be thinking more about that and how we interact with cyber and with the cyber world. So everyone is constantly being attacked. There are studies, and if you download the slides, there are some links in the slides. So the automated online scanning, there's a great article there that talks about how in 30 days, more than 5 million attacks were found against 10 what they call honeypots. So the researchers set up these virtual machines. They put them around the world, and they looked to see, how many attacks are they seeing, and how quickly were they found. And again, in 30 days, more than 5 million attacks against 10 honeypots. And these weren't things that they started telling the world, oh my God, these things exist and you need to pay attention to it. These were literally just computers that were plugged into the internet and just sat there. And the bad guys scanned them again over 5 million times in just 30 days. It took 52 seconds before somebody found some of them and tried to log in. In the US, those logins were less than 20 minutes. So in some parts of the world, things are even worse than they are here in the US. The US, we try to do a reasonable job, but the fact of the matter is that the internet is so rife with bad actors, and it is so easy to be a bad actor that the reality is that the minute that you plug anything into the internet, it is constantly being scanned. People are trying to hack into it, every device, all the time. So even Ireland, you see on the note there, took an hour, basically a little over an hour and a half before the device was found, and you saw the first login attempt. And to be clear, in order to log in, I have to find the device. I have to figure out what kind of device it is. I have to figure out where the logins would go, and then I can finally begin that login process. That is, again, time consuming to do that basic research. This all happens really quickly, and so people are doing this stuff in an automated fashion. Again, your devices are just always under attack, and it's only getting worse. We're seeing the rise of everybody's familiar with malware, everybody's familiar with phishing attacks and with ransomware, hopefully at this point. We're seeing now malware as a service, where people, instead of writing their own malware and trying to use it to attack someone else's machine or to send it as an attachment or whatever, they are now writing it and selling that malware to others. And so it's an entire service where they will receive that malware, they'll maintain that malware for them, they'll actually receive back information from the malware. There's an entire industry around doing that. And same thing with ransomware. They actually have now that malware is actually targeted as ransomware. It has all the keys that are necessary to do the encryption for ransomware, has all the other stuff that's necessary. It's all built in. They have the entire infrastructure in place to push that out. It's an amazing industry that is out there. Basically, it's a bunch of thieves selling stuff to other thieves, which is a really scary prospect. But now we have multiple levels to this whole organization. You talk about organized crime. It is a really well organized group. They have a lot of resources. They make a lot of money, so makes it very attractive for them to stay in this space. And it's done through simple things like phishing. If your organization, if your firm is, or if your company is dealing with or pushing out those phishing emails and phishing tests, there's a reason. The majority of the ransomware and other attacks and incidents that we see come from human errors, and the majority of those come from phishing. So that stuff is low-hanging fruit. It is really easy to spam somebody and get them to click on a link. Sometimes that phishing is intentionally poorly written, so those emails have spelling mistakes, they have bad grammar. It is blatantly obvious that that email is a phishing attempt, but yet people still fall for them. And one of the reasons that the bad guys do this, I mentioned before how they are very sophisticated. You would think they could learn how to spell and use, grammar checkers and all that kind of stuff. The reality is that in some cases, those are intentionally poorly written, because if you fall for those, then you are the perfect victim for them, because you will fall for the rest of their scam as well. In other cases, the bad guys are taking great pains to be very exacting. They will research your organization. They will find exactly who you are. They will target a handful of people in the company, and they will pretend to be your CEO. They will pretend to be someone else in the organization to try to motivate you to begin taking some kind of action. All of this, again, is outsourced. You can buy these services, and in some cases, that malware costs somewhere between $250 and $500. It is not expensive to get into this business. So when the world is in such a disarray that it is that inexpensive, we need to start doing something, and especially we as lawyers need to start doing something. And you have to remember that these impacts are not only going to impact you at the personal level, they may be targeting you individually, but they're also going to target you professionally and impact you professionally. We've seen a lot of different cases, and law firms are very aggressively being targeted by the bad guys all over the place. Remember that in some cases, what they're after isn't ransomware. In many cases, that is their initial modus operandi, because it's an easy, low-hanging fruit. Everybody's familiar with it, and they know that the insurance companies will pay the ransom sometimes, even though that's illegal in most states, and even though that is highly frowned upon by the federal government as well. Still happens. And so we know that the bad guys know that this stuff happens, and that it's an easy way to make money. In many cases, in what they're calling ransomware 2.0, the bad guys are also extracting at least part of that information. They're exfiltrating that from your organization before they encrypt it, and they now have copies of this, so they will come back and blackmail you with it later. And so they know that, again, law firms have deep pockets. Law firms have highly sensitive information from many of their more sensitive clients. You look at what happened with Mossack Fonseca in Brazil a couple of years ago, in Panama a couple of years ago. that's referred to as the Panama Papers. You'd think I would get that right. The Panama Papers is Mossack Fonseca was one of the largest and most connected law firms in Panama. It was founded by a former president of the country. Eventually, they were hacked, and they had clients from across the political spectrum. All the big names all used Mossack Fonseca. When they were hacked, all of the confidential conversations that their clients had with the firm were published publicly. It almost caused the collapse of the Panamanian government. It came very close. There were all sorts of issues in the country. People were holding protests, and there was a lot of dirty laundry that was aired when that happened. You think about the reputational damage that caused. Mossack Fonseca doesn't exist anymore. Again, one of the presidents of the nation, their name got dragged through the mud because of this. And it's not just a foreign problem. You see issues with DLA Piper, Wild, Cravath, and so all of these firms and many others have had cyber issues. Does that mean that they are doing a bad job with cybersecurity? No, not necessarily. There are some really, really good bad actors. Your security teams can be good most of the time and still cause problems or still face problems because you have a bad actor or somebody who does something ignorant inside of the firm or inside your company. So all the bad guys have to be right is once. They only have to get lucky once and they get in. The security teams need to be perfect every time, and we're all human. There is nothing you can do, even with the best automation, even with the best everything else. Your teams are there are still people involved in this process, and so there will always be issues. You need to think about security in depth. You need to think about how you're protecting this information, and you need to understand as you are conducting your work that the world has changed and security does get in the way. It does slow things down for you and for everyone else. And that's by design because it also slows down the bad guys. And so having to take out your multi-factor authentication and punch in that 6-digit code, yes, it's a pain in the rear. But believe me, those kinds of things are in place for a reason. And when you think about the aggregate time that you spend entering that 6-digit code every time, compared to how long it takes to respond to a ransomware attack, respond to some of these other issues, and the total cost, it is still more efficient for you to deal with those issues in the short run than to try to deal with the results if you're not taking those security steps. Give me a second. So the ABA has recognized this, and the ABA is really beginning to push lawyers to be more responsive. Where the ABA is recognizing that we handled all of this really sensitive information, and it doesn't matter whether you're an in-house lawyer like me or outside counsel, you are handling all of that really sensitive information, and you can be targeted in different ways. So they've actually updated the ABA model rule of professional conduct. 1.1 has now a comment 8 to it that says to maintain the requisite knowledge and skill, a lawyer should keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. I happen to have just finished doing another session on AI and the use of AI in legal practices. There are lots of risks. AI is really cool, and I am of the opinion that it is not quite ready for prime time in certain use case or many use cases. There are certain exceptions to that, but generally speaking, AI is a really cool thing. But right now, it's more likely to cause harm to you and your clients than to benefit you in your practice, big picture. So being able to stay abreast of these risks, understanding how the world is changing and that it is cyber, there's privacy issues, there are other issues that come into play in your practice is critical. If you aren't doing that, you're not fulfilling that competent representation requirement that's in the Rule of Professional Conduct 1.1. I happen to be a Virginia lawyer. Virginia has taken this even a little bit further and said to maintain the requisite knowledge, lawyers shall engage in continuing study and education, and attention should be paid to the benefits and risk associated with relevant technology. Again, they are really trying to double down on this, making sure, and other states are following suit, really trying to make sure that you are paying attention to cyber and other risks associated with using that technology. When it comes to the use of AI, for example, there is the potential for data leakage. There's potential for the poisoning of your own information or your client's information based on open source information. There's all sorts of issues that come along with the use of technology. And if you are not aware of those and begin to understand and begin using those pieces of technology, you again put your clients at significant risk, and you put your own practice at significant risk as well. So it's often wise to take some time and really learn more about the way that technology functions before you begin to embrace it. And that goes all the way down to, how do I secure it? How do I make sure that that information is encrypted all the time? All of those things. Again, ABA Model Rule Professional Conduct 1.4. I apologize for reading these off, but for CLE purposes, I do want to make sure that we touch all the right buttons. So in 1.4, attorneys must reasonably consult with the client about the means by which the client's objectives are to be accomplished. That includes, I'm going to email these things to you. People need to understand what the risk is with email, because depending on your email system and the receiving party's email system, that email may be unencrypted. So you are sending confidential, and in some cases attorney-client privileged information across the internet in what's called clear text, which means that anybody can read it. You need to make sure that your client understands the risks, or that you find an alternate way of communicating with the client. Your attorneys must promptly comply with reasonable requests for information. That's reasonably easy to do, although that generally means that you need to have some kind of data loss prevention or data identification tool to be able to spot the right kinds of information to be responsive to those requests. You have to keep clients reasonably informed about the status of a matter. That's pretty well known. And then explain matters to the extent reasonably necessary to permit a client to make an informed decision regarding the representation. So again, that communication today is typically conducted by email and digital files. If you are sending those in an unencrypted form, you're not really meeting some of these obligations, or at least there is an argument that if something were to happen, that client could use to pursue malpractice claims, or that the bar could use to come after you. So really do want to be taking all of this into account, thinking about it very carefully. If you have a small law practice, you need to, if you're trying to do everything yourself, it's probably time for you to bring in at least a consultant. It doesn't have to be somebody who's in your practice day by day and running your systems on a daily basis, but somebody who's in reviewing the way everything is configured, making sure that it's set up to be secure, or at least as secure as possible, and making sure that you're checking the right boxes from an overall legal and ethical perspective. In Virginia, same idea. They've adopted pretty much verbatim the requirements from the model rule. So really important, again, making sure that you are checking all those right boxes in order to stay out of trouble from Virginia's perspective. A little later, we'll talk about in more detail how to go about implementing some of these rules, because these are, again, so critical to your overall practice. And remember, if you're in-house counsel like me, all of these requirements still apply to you and your practice. So even when you are emailing things within your company, if that email system is unencrypted, if there are people who can see those emails that shouldn't be able to see them, that creates problems. There are issues potentially with attorney-client privilege. You have other bigger picture issues that come into play with this. So taking the time to understand the technology, understanding what the implications are for you and for your practice is going to be critical. In ABA Model Rule of Professional Conduct 1.6c, lawyer must take reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of information that relating to the representation of a client. Notice that comment 18 has several factors that are used to determine reasonableness. That's one of my favorite words. because it's always hard to define what is reasonable. So it's awesome that the ABA in this context has provided some guidelines. So you're looking to the sensitivity of the information. Most organizations don't stop to think about the sensitivity of their information. They treat all information the same way. If you're treating everything as though it's the super secret sauce, then awesome. That makes things really easy. But if you are thinking and realizing that in some cases your clients aren't sending you super secret sauce all the time, or your internal chat to your partner who is inviting you to their kid's first birthday, that probably doesn't need to be protected in the same way. In some cases, or in a lot of cases, it is just more efficient and economically efficient to make sure that you are just protecting everything at that super secret sauce level. But in some cases, uh, when the firm is big enough, it is cost prohibitive to do everything that way. So understanding how sensitive the information is, understanding how to handle this really sensitive information is critical, and basically getting that basic data inventory in place, understanding what you're touching in the first place so that you are properly protecting it. One of the things that's not listed in here is that there are implications. So depending on the nature of the information that you are receiving, you may have certain other obligations, and in some cases your client may have certain other obligations to when communicating that information to you. So for example, if there is personally identifiable information or healthcare information that you're receiving, you need to make sure that you are conscious of that and that you are protecting it appropriately, because there are laws, regulations, or government-wide policies that say that that information has to be protected in a certain way. Similarly, if you are handling what's called controlled unclassified information, the government's unclassified but sensitive information on behalf of your client, or if you're representing the government, you need to have appropriate protections in place for your systems. There's a whole host of stuff. The Department of Defense is pushing a big initiative to get all of its defense contractors to be properly protecting this stuff using the controls, the security requirements that are defined in a program called NIST Special Publication 800-171. Those requirements are really good. If your firm does not have a good cybersecurity program in place, please take the time to put something in place. And I would encourage you to look at 800-171 as the basis for your firm's program, because when you look at the information that the government is trying to protect, it is the same kind of stuff that we as lawyers always handle. So that's the basic business information that your clients are handling and sharing with you. It's the financial information, it's personally identifiable information, all of the kinds of stuff that we handle as lawyers, it's all there. So the government has said that when they get this stuff, 800-171 is the basis that anybody who handles that on their behalf, that's the requirements. Those are the security requirements are defined in 800-171. It just makes sense for you as you are building out your practice and as you're building out your cyber programs to follow the guidance that the government is imposing on all of it, or the requirements that the government is imposing on all of its government contractors. So really smart thing to do. Again, that's just a sensitivity. Likelihood of disclosure at this point, the likelihood of disclosure is incredibly high. As we talked about before, you have that ransomware as a service, you have all these other things going on. The threats are just insane. So you may as well assume that that is a super high likelihood of disclosure. The cost of imposing additional safeguards at this stage of the game, the idea isn't that you put up a firewall on your network and you're done, or a firewall and antivirus and you're done. You have to have what's called defense in depth. You have to have multiple levels to your security. That all does add cost. There is a point I mentioned before where you have some information that's relatively not all that valuable, and the cost of protecting it may outweigh the cost of any kind of inadvertent disclosure. And so you can weigh that, and it is not unreasonable, according to the ABA, for you to take that into account when you're building your cyber program. But as a practical matter, for most organizations, it is more cost effective when you factor in the cost of the the hardware, software, and most importantly, the people that are involved in this process, including training your own employees, your non-technical employees, about how to do all this stuff. It is just more time efficient, more cost effective to impose everything. So even though there are additional costs here, you just handle everything as though it's super secret sauce and make it really easy. And then you have to look at the extent to which the safeguards adversely affect the lawyer's ability to represent clients. Here today, it's really hard for us to argue that deploying this kind of stuff won't have an impact on you. And Joshua, did you want to do the first code now?
Yes, now is a great time. I'll throw up the first password. Just as a reminder for anyone who joined a little late today, we will have passwords throughout today's program. When you see those passwords, it doesn't matter if you choose the first or the second option. What's most important is that you write down all the passwords you see today and you bring them over to the PCI website and put them into the password survey. That will be how you receive credit for attending today's session. Again, this is your first password. I'll leave it up for about 5 more seconds so James can get back into it. All right, thank you, James.
Awesome. So, and again, Virginia is looking at things from that same perspective, and I apologize for harping on Virginia. Like I said, I am a Virginia lawyer, and they are very particular about a lot of these things, and I think in many ways are leading the nation in some of these issues. So that's why you see a lot of the stuff coming up here. But again, the fundamental point is we need to be better as lawyers at making sure that this stuff really does happen. So let's look at trying to pull some of those and some of the model rules and the Virginia State Bar guidelines together. Attorneys have clear ethical obligations to ensure the tools used in the process of providing services are reasonably secure, and ensuring that they're educated on the risks and benefits associated with different technologies used in their practice. These days, most firms are moving away from things that are hosted in their environment, having their own IT infrastructure, all the servers and everything that we used to see. I'm a former systems administrator for Congress. I used to maintain a whole bunch of different servers and things around my office. And I know back when I joined my firm a long time ago, they had most of that infrastructure was internal. These days, you can buy resources online in Amazon and other places that you can outsource the maintenance of those, and life is very different and in many cases a lot easier. The problem is when you're using those cloud resources, you need to make sure that those cloud resources are properly configured, that you have that you understand where what's called the service responsibility matrix. You have to understand the things that you are responsible for doing and the things that that cloud service provider is doing. So for example, if you are a small firm and you're using Microsoft 365 to handle your communications and handle your email file storage and all of that stuff, Microsoft 365 is a wonderful service. Nothing that I'm saying is meant as a dig on them at all. But Microsoft sells a couple different flavors of 365. And if you're using 365 commercial and you're handling some of the government's controlled and classified information, and especially if it is DoD information, then you've got some issues because Microsoft commercial doesn't live up to all of the regulatory requirements that exist. Outsourcing in from a big picture makes a lot of sense. It is a smart thing to do for many firms. But you do, again, as you're using all of these different cloud resources and other resources, and I work for a software as a service company, these are issues that we deal with as well because we handle companies' sensitive information. You have to think about, as the consumer, you have to think about what kinds of obligations are in place and how are you going to live up to your commitments with your customers, your legal and regulatory requirements as well. Make sure that you're choosing services that are mindful of this. And unfortunately, that means that you are reading a lot of the legal documents, all of those terms and conditions that everybody loves to click through. You really do need to read those. And I know I'm preaching to the choir as I'm talking to a bunch of lawyers, but as a practical matter, as we are running our practices, as we are running our business, it is so easy to just click accept and move on. But you really do need to stop and think about what kinds of information you're putting up in that service, and be mindful that as you are adding staff to your legal team or to your firm, make sure that they understand the limitations. So today you might grab some cloud service and see that, oh, it's set up fine for my particular use case. But then you bring on someone else to the practice, they see that this resource is available to them, and they start putting other kinds of information in there and things that you hadn't anticipated. Take the time to create a list of the tools and services that you're using. Take the time to identify the kinds of information that you're putting on there, and take the time to define what kinds of information shouldn't go into those resources. Do that now. Do that every time you bring up some new service in your environment. That's going to be the way that you help reduce the risk to yourselves and to your clients. If you're not taking the time to do that, you haven't met some of these basic requirements, fundamentally ensuring that the tools used in the process of providing services are reasonably secure. Unless you've done that diligence, you have failed to meet that basic fundamental tenet in our ethical requirements. So really important, make sure that you have all of this stuff, make sure you have all your ducks in a row. ABA issued a formal opinion 483 a couple years ago now. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly encourage you to grab a copy and read it. It does talk about how, again, lawyers must employ reasonable efforts to monitor the technology and office resources connected to the internet. And then, as a matter of preparation and best practice, however, lawyers should consider proactively developing an incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan in your organization, and if you haven't tested that incident response plan, you are in trouble. You are asking for problems. One of the reasons that we encourage people to test those incident response plans is that you have people coming and going from your organization, people who come on who take on responsibilities that they don't even realize they were supposed to be taking on. They play a role in that incident response, or the nature of the incident changes, and you need to understand who to talk, who is going to talk, who's supposed to interact with law enforcement, how you're going to message things to your clients. All of that stuff is critical to ensuring an effective incident response. If you're not testing it, trying to build that incident response plan in the moment while you're responding to an incident, or trying to deal with all these issues after the fact, is just, it's not the right time. You have the luxury of time right now. If you take the time and write out that incident response plan, life gets a whole lot better. If you do work with the United States government, you should be paying very close attention to their incident response requirements. There are reporting requirements that are coming into play. Even if you are working for a highly regulated entity like a financial services company, there are reporting requirements now. The SEC is looking at, so if you're a public company, the SEC is looking at incident reporting. There are a lot of different agencies throughout the government that are imposing these the new reporting requirements, and it's a big mishmash of different agencies that you have to report to, depending on the kinds of information, et cetera, and kind of information, who you are, et cetera. It's a real burden right now. There are some efforts underway to standardize those requirements, less important or impactful for you as a lawyer if you're an outside counsel, but really important for you to understand for your clients, because they are going to be facing a lot of these additional reporting requirements. But again, for turning back to you, you have to make sure that you have that incident response plan in place. If you don't have one, I can send you one. You can contact me. I have a draft incident response plan. It is just a template. But the idea is you need to be naming people, or at least roles, in the organization who are responsible for performing certain actions. You can imagine, if you have an incident in your environment, many folks, including your managing partner or including your CEO, are all going to be watching what's happening very carefully. I happen to work for a small business. I would probably be the face of our incident. In most cases, in our incident response plan, that is the role that I play. And that's done for a reason, because if the CEO jumps in up front and begins making public statements and you have to walk them back, you can't escalate from there. You can't have the CEO, unless the CEO is going to step down, they can't be the public face for these things. Same thing with your managing partner. If you have a breach and the managing partner is the one who's reaching out to clients and is the face of the breach for your firm, when something happens, when more information is found, when there's a contradictory position, and this stuff happens all the time in incidents, when you have to walk something back, now it starts to impact the trust in the firm. It starts to impact the trust of the organization. So it is smarter to have other folks who are the face of the incident, and then you can always escalate. Most organizations, again, because they are the leaders, because they are the ones who they feel the pressure of needing to keep the clients happy and informed, they feel like they need to be out there and the face of it, and having those conversations up front, training your teams that know this is the right way to do it, is really important. And even more fundamentally, deciding what is an incident, what does it mean to declare something as an incident, and who needs to be involved, and when do you tell the CEO or the managing partner? How often do you bring them in? When do you bring in outside counsel? When do you bring in law enforcement? Those are things that if you think them through now and you've approached them properly from your firm or from your organization's best perspective, that's the best thing that you can do. You're never going to get it perfect. There's always going to be some weird variable that you hadn't thought of in the actual day-to-day. So what's the old phrase? Man plans and God laughs, right? And so every time you do something and you try to create these incident response plans, when the incident happens, there will always be the things that you forgot. You have to accept that, but understand, most importantly, that if you haven't started planning, if you haven't started creating this outline of what you're going to do, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to be winging it from the beginning. Much easier to have a framework that lays out roles and responsibilities and timing and all of that kind of stuff up front, and to understand the legal and regulatory obligations that go along with you handling some of this stuff. In fact, even at a law firm, if you are representing larger companies, those companies may impose incident reporting requirements of their own. So now you have these additional contractual requirements that you need to track, make sure that you're dealing with them. So again, all of that goes into that incident response plan, makes things makes things much easier and smarter to handle. The decision whether to adopt a plan, the content of the plan, and actions taken to train and prepare of them should be made before a lawyer is swept into an actual breach. That's again, really fundamental information, really good advice from the ABA. And those were from lessons learned. And this stuff, in some cases, is several years old. ABA was smart enough to get ahead of it. It's funny because I was just in a session where someone else was talking about how slow the ABA is to write some of these model rules, and how in other areas of ethics and professionalism, it can take decades. In this case, the ABA is actually being reasonably proactive. We've had cyber breaches for decades now, but the impact on law firms and some of the more immediacy and the scope of some of the issues that we're seeing is just significantly increasing. So taking the time to do all of this stuff now, and again, the ABA being proactive in these things is a really smart thing to do, and it's great to see them taking these actions now. Ultimately, as you are building out your cyber program, I hinted to this a minute ago when I talked about the 800-171 and the government's approach to this. When you have a breach, again, I mentioned how your teams are going to be doing their best and can try their hardest, but we're all human, and the bad guys only have to get lucky once. When that incident happens in your environment, you need to be ready with a defensible program. You need to have outlined what you're doing, how you're doing it, and show that the bad guys got in because of, for example, what's called a zero-day attack, something that was previously unknown except to the bad guys. So your team's doing all the right things, it's just there was a weakness that had gone undetected, and so the bad guys got in. You need to be able to show that. That's going to give the courts a lot more confidence. It's going to give the regulators a lot more confidence, and it's going to give your clients a lot more confidence, so that they are less likely to walk away if they're a client, or to hit you with large fines or other penalties if we're talking about the courts. So take the time, define the firm's approach to risk management upfront. And that includes tracking a lot of basic information. You need to conduct basic inventories of where are you doing business, so that you know what local laws and regulations or state laws and regulations apply to you from a cyber perspective. Make sure you're thinking about, if you're a commercial business, what business units or practice areas do you have, or even in a law firm, do you have a consulting arm? And what kinds of things does that consulting arm do? Are you separating them from an IT and technology perspective? Are they on their own infrastructure, or are they on shared infrastructure with the law firm? Really defining these attributes. What kinds of clients do you have? What kinds of information are you getting from those clients? Are you about to do an M&A transaction? Are you buying some other firm, merging with some firm, or at the corporate level, again, are you buying some other organization? Are you about to expand, start a new office somewhere else? All of these are things that impact your cyber. They impact your IT architecture. In the M&A world, you're bringing in somebody else's potential problems. That's what happened to Marriott in the Marriott breach from a couple of years ago when they bought Starwood Hotels. Marriott's program was actually not bad. Starwood, on the other hand, had some inherent flaws in it that the bad guys had already taken advantage of. And so when the merger happened, the two networks were brought together and it created issues. So understanding all of these things, understanding how the world plays and the impact of these different changes on your organization is critical. And ultimately, once you've defined who you are, what you have, and what you do, then the last part is understanding the legal and regulatory requirements that come from these attributes. So that's the basic data inventory and basic identity inventory for the organization. Get those attributes, understand who you are. Without those, you really are flying blind when you're trying to create your cyber program, when you're trying to create that incident response plan, because there will be issues that you haven't thought of. Again, if you don't know all the jurisdictions that you're practicing in, or you don't know what kinds of information you have, you're going to miss stuff. The more diligence you can do upfront to define everything, the less likely you are to get slapped down by the courts or by the regulators. And you'd use that information to also define the firm's approach to risk management. So after you've defined what those attributes are, now you're looking at how are they interrelated. So which locations handle certain kinds of information? How does it flow? How do you characterize your risk so that there's that next step of, now that you're aware of some of these potential issues, now you need to start to figure out, how are we going to handle them? Not everything is a high risk issue. So how do I need to manage those, and how are we going to go about defining what is high risk and isn't high risk? There are some really great tools out there. Everything from basic, what they call heat maps, which are just grids of your likelihood on one axis and your impact on the other. Low likelihood, low impact means that it's not a high risk, and it may be something that you can simply accept the risk of. As you get up into the high impact, high risk, now you're things that you probably need to take mitigation steps to avoid them completely, or mitigate or avoidance. And then somewhere in the middle, maybe you're looking to transfer some of that risk. You're buying insurance, you're doing other things to address that risk. You want to take some time to figure out how the company is planning to, or how the firm is planning to address those risks, so that now you have a consistent approach to it. And all of that, you'll notice that I didn't say cyber risk in any of that stuff. These are approaches to risk management writ large, and they may be employee termination related risks. They may be other risks, even environmental risks, earthquakes, floods, etc., that could happen to the firm. Taking the time to understand how you're going to, and begin to create a structured approach to managing and identifying risk, that's really critical to creating that defensible program, because now you can show that, again, this stuff isn't ad hoc. You actually have a structure to it. Maybe something happened that that's a one-off. But the more you can do to show that it is a one-off, the better off the firm is going to be. And then you're looking at things like your risk appetite and risk tolerance. Those are two terms that you'll hear a lot. The more you can do, again, to formalize your approach and understand the difference between risk appetite and risk tolerance, the better off you're going to be. So risk appetite is how much residual risk are you willing to accept? That is, after I've taken my steps, I've decided what stuff I need to avoid and what stuff I'm going to take actions to mitigate, that is, reduce the impact or reduce the likelihood or both of them occurring. And in places where I've transferred some of that risk, so I've bought insurance, how much residual risk am I still facing? In some cases, that's your deductible for your insurance. In some cases, there are other calculus that come into play, but how much residual risk are we facing? And then when a new opportunity comes up, this is your risk tolerance. How much deviation can we see in that risk appetite? So if I've got a $100 million contract that I may be able to win, but I've got to eat another $500,000, $1 million worth of risk, am I willing to take that on? And how does that change things? And you'll notice that that means then that if I do take that on, my risk appetite has changed. You need to be thinking about these on a continuous basis, taking the time to build out that thought. And I know this is a complex concept, and I know it is can be time consuming, but the more time you take to build this out in your firm or in your company, you're creating actually a better, more well-structured organization. And ultimately what you find is that decisions get made better in the organization, because now you've started to think about what is high impact, what is a high likelihood, and you are now enabling other people who are not necessarily in the leadership roles in the organization to understand how the organization thinks, how its decisions should be made, and you can start pushing down some of those decisions that usually float up to management. You can actually start pushing them down into your middle management, and in some cases even down into your line employees, empowering them to be more responsive, because now you've given them a structure for how to make these decisions. So ultimately, you're looking at those risk management approaches, and that involves really writing policies, procedures, plans, et cetera, in your organization. If you're not that familiar with these concepts, policies are the thou shalt not kill type of high-level statements about how the organization is going to address certain risks that it faces, or just the way that the organization is managed writ large. Procedures are like recipes. They are things that are followed, and when you follow them, the same outcome occurs every time. Plans, by contrast, are things where you have probably decisions that have to be made in them, and as a result, running the plan multiple times, you get different outcomes inherently. So taking the time, writing those policies, procedures, plans, really defining the organization and your approach to things. Again, when you've written those procedures specifically, now because they are a very mechanical, very easy to follow, that recipe approach, you can push those things all the way down to line employees, to some of your lowest level in a law firm. Those are, your assistants and others can do all of these things because they're basically just following the playbook. There aren't decisions that have to be made. So you can get lower cost talent involved to do some of that work. When it comes to that, frees you up then as the lawyer, as the decision maker, to make those things where your clients are actually paying you. That's the stuff that the client really wants to pay you for, is the stuff that you need to pay attention to. So again, you can shift the cost by taking the time to define all of these risks. There are lists here of different kinds of policies, procedures, plans that your organization should have in place. If you don't have them, there are templates available. The CMMC Information Institute has several of them that you can download. There are vendor questionnaires. So you're going to take the time, if you follow the advice in this session, you'll take the time to really define what you're supposed to do and how your firm or your company is going to handle its own cyber programs. But then you have to look outside, and vendor risk management, if you haven't really been paying attention to it. It is a huge deal. Many organizations are paying attention to it. As I mentioned, the United States government, the Department of Defense, is really pushing that vendor risk from their perspective, because they know that they are giving information to their vendors that they have a legal and regulatory obligation to make sure that it is properly protected. So they're putting in place programs to protect that information, and making sure that their vendors do it. And on the flip side, when they're buying stuff from those vendors, if the vendors aren't doing things like following secure software development processes, or ensuring that the stuff that they are buying is coming from legitimate vendors instead of black market goods. There are cases out there of companies selling counterfeit Cisco and other equipment to the federal government. If the vendors aren't doing their diligence properly, the federal government knows that it's going to lead to all sorts of problems for them. And for you as a lawyer, or for you as a commercial company, you have those same risks. None of that is unique to the federal government. So making sure that you understand who your vendors are, whether they have their own cybersecurity programs in place, what are they doing, how much diligence have they done internally and with their own supply chain. All of these are things that are critical to ensuring that you have a good, effective program. As I said, you can do all of that, or you can leverage the program that the government is creating. So there is this special publication 800-171. You could try to do all of the analyses, the risk stuff that I talked about before. I'm an author of a couple different books. One of them is on enterprise risk management. All the things that I just discussed are things that I think are really important for organizations to do. I do recognize, as I mentioned, it's time consuming. It's hard. These concepts are both intellectually, can be difficult to understand, and emotionally, you are dealing with some interesting issues, and you're pushing a lot of, again, emotional buttons for your organization. Not every company wants to go through all of those hoops and to build a good program. One of the advantages of leveraging NIST Special Publication 800-171 is that the government has gone through that process for you. So they have looked at the kinds of information that are covered by laws, regulations, and government policies and said, okay, here is some basic cybersecurity, or here are some basic cybersecurity requirements that everybody should have in place when you're handling this kind of information. And again, that's patent applications, law enforcement information, business information, even naval nuclear propulsion information is covered by 800-171. So if you can put in place a good program that aligns with 800-171, then you have a reasonably defensible program, and you can kind of short circuit some of the stuff that I talked about. I still believe it is a smart thing to make sure that you understand all of your attributes, make sure that you understand all the other stuff that we ran through, but picking 800-171 can make your life a whole lot easier and can buy you a little more time to do some of that internal navel gazing. It's important to note that 800-171 does not mean that it doesn't alleviate you from performing the legal and regulatory review. There is actually a requirement in 800-171 that says that you need to look at all the relevant laws, regulations, and government policies and make sure that you are meeting any additional security requirements that are there. But the government has said that when it comes to handling, when it comes to handling this kind of sensitive information, if the law, regulation, or government-wide policy simply says that it has to be protected, and they don't say how to protect it, these are the basic requirements that need to be in place. So it's a great choice for a cyber framework. And when you're looking at those legal and regulatory concerns, remember that they are not just at the federal level. There are state level concerns as well. So you have the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. For-profit entities conducting business with California residents have to pay attention to this. So if your firm does business in California, or if your company does business there, you are subject to the CCPA. New York State Rule 500 imposes requirements on covered entities, which are the financial services entities. Less relevant probably for most law firms, but for your clients, or for if you're a commercial entity and you're a financial services company, you have to deal with this. And importantly, if you are doing business with one of those financial services companies, you've probably already received those vendor questionnaires that I mentioned before. One of the beautiful things about 800-171 is that, one of the beautiful things about the CMMC program, the DoD's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, is tied to 800-171. In that case, what they're doing is sending out assessors like me to go and review your vendors and make sure that each vendor is secure, make sure that their programs pass a certain meet the 800-171 requirements, and they'll actually issue a certification to that vendor. So now, instead of you having to send that vendor questionnaire out and ask them all these gory details about their cyber programs, you can ask them for a copy of that certificate. That is very different than SOC 2 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 1, or some of the other certifications that are out there, because many of those are simply SOC 2 Type 2, for example, is an attestation of the organization's current state, but it is not necessarily an attestation that the organization meets all of the best practices that should be in place. It's merely that you understand who you are, you understand your failings, and that you've reported those in some meaningful way. That's different from a certification like CMMC, where they're saying, not only do you understand what your shortcomings are, you fixed them, and now you are managing your environment in a secure manner. So getting that certification, again, can make that vendor risk management piece a whole lot easier. That makes it easier to comply with New York State Department of Financial Services Rule 500. Again, DoD's CUI, the controlled unclassified information, that sensitive but unclassified information, their programs are important to understand that, again, if you or your clients are handling that kind of stuff, you need to have it, you need to understand what's going on in their environments. And then in many states, you have employers' duty of care with employee information. So one of the interesting ones for me was in Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania Medical Center tried to argue that when they had a breach and their employees' information was the subject of the breach, they tried to argue that they did not have a duty of care to their employees with respect to that information. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court disagreed and said that a reasonable entity in UPMC's position should have foreseen that failure to use basic security measures could lead to exposure of the data and serious financial consequences for the medical center's employees. So the UPMC got beat up pretty bad. They had to pay some pretty significant fines, and there are other organizations in other states that are following along with that concept. So again, really important to make sure that you're checking all the right boxes, understanding what your legal and regulatory obligations are. Even as a law firm, you are handling your employees' sensitive information. You have their bank account information because most people do direct deposit these days. You have their social security number because you have to report that for tax purposes. You have their first name, last name, email address. You have their home address. You have all of this PII. And so the states are saying that all these entities have to pay attention and have a duty of care to protect their employees' information. So it's not just your clients that you have to think about. Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 37E says that if you are not properly protecting and taking reasonable steps to preserve the information that you have in your environment, you are also going to get in trouble, including if this is the subject of litigation. There are potential for dismissing the action or entering of a default judgment because you weren't properly protecting the information and ensuring that it's not altered in some ways. So your cyber programs, and especially if you receive a notification of a litigation, litigation hold was the term I was looking for. If you receive a litigation hold, you need to make sure that you're taking steps to protect that information. You have backups, you have some kind of alert that's there in case that information is changed in some way. If someone in your firm is taking steps to do something malicious, you need to be ready to understand that is happening. And even if your organization's attempts at this fall flat, it can still lead to, because you haven't done this properly, it can still lead to that default judgment. So again, there are lots of implications here. Making sure that you are having appropriate controls in place to protect the information is just foundationally critical to a good cyber program. And Joshua, I see that it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to actually take a breath and make sure that you have a chance to do the second code.
All right, so the second password is up now. And we discussed taking about a 5-minute break. So do you want to do that now as well?
I think that makes sense, yes.
All right, too easy. So everyone, the second password is up now. Just a reminder, you want to write all of these down and bring them over to the PCI website. That will be how you receive credit. If you have any problems seeing the passwords or finding out where to put them, you can email me at joshpina@publiccontractinginstitute.com. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, just kind of stretch your legs, grab water, whatever you need to do, and we will be back at 1:05. James will take over then.
Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you.
So I have been looking through the questions. I don't see any questions so far. What I meant to mention before was if you do have questions, you are welcome to enter them in the questions. I am trying to monitor it as best I can. I used to be a professor, and so I'm used to kind of having a bunch of different windows open, but I am admittedly a little out of practice. So, but if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and I will try to address them quickly. And that's both now and throughout the presentation. Feel free to pop them in there. So not seeing anything, and I do recognize that it can take a little while for people to type everything out, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to moving from theory to practice. So we talked before about how the cyber programs should be architected and some of the big picture risks and things, but let's try to take it down to a level where this becomes a little more practical and how you can actually apply this to your practice on a day-to-day basis. So one of the first things that we need to think about is why people hack. One of the things to understand is that criminals aren't all the guys in hoodies in their parents' basement that you think of when you think about hackers. A lot of times they kind of look like this. It is just a normal person who does their job. In fact, in some countries, this is a full-time job, in some cases sponsored by the state. You can actually see from the attack logs and things like that when certain countries would be coming online, for example, Russia. You can see an increase in the number of attacks through their business day, and then at the end of the business day, it winds down. So even though they are criminals, and you think criminals would be, attacking at certain hours or working pretty much 24/7, the actual truth is they aren't always. And again, with this being state sponsored, it becomes a real job for people. So these attacks, they do happen all the time, but they again tend to happen at critical times, either for us or for them. When I say for us, those are things like when the when we have the Friday night or some weekend or holiday or things like that, critical times for us. They know that we're going to be more vulnerable, so their folks will be available. But again, as a general rule, you can actually see the attacks ebb and flow based on time zones and that kind of stuff. And ultimately, hackers are coming in looking for certain kinds of things. We've moved away from a lot of the hacktivists, although recently we've seen a spike in hacktivism where people are attacking different organizations for political purposes. With the advent of the Ukraine war and with the things going on in the Middle East, you are seeing some activists getting back involved with things and really trying to push social change through hacking. In some cases, they are taking down electrical grids, they're taking down other systems and making life hard for good guys, bad guys, and everything depends on your point of view, who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. But they're trying to make things harder for their adversaries and or easier for their teams. And so we do see some of that today. In many cases in the past, that hacktivism was more focused on less immediate threats, things like pushing social change for social justice purposes, et cetera. And so there's the notoriety that goes along with it. And then there are those that are really attacking for financial gain. So they're trying to make sure that they have some kind of revenue. In some cases, at the nation state level, that's happening to fund their regimes. So there are stories of Russia, North Korea, and some Middle Eastern countries who have entire teams. In fact, it was estimated that in China, there was a recent attack that probably had somewhere on the order of around 500,000 people involved in the attack. So there are whole groups that are generating revenue for their regimes by doing this kind of hacking. And so, this becomes a job. Like I said, it becomes a way of generating money. And then on the flip side, you have the what are called white hat hackers, and they're important to know about because you may get notifications from folks that say, "Hey, we've discovered a vulnerability in your website. We've discovered some other issue." If you run an online platform like my company does, we get emails occasionally from people purporting to find problems in our platform. We actually pay someone to come in and do penetration tests for us. They act like a bad guy and try to break into our systems. So we know where a lot of our vulnerabilities exist. And we also know when those vulnerabilities exist because of third parties. They're the tools and services that we use to provide our service, and things that we have no control over. And so those white hat hackers are actually trying to do you a favor. I know for a lot of folks, that concept is a little disconcerting because, hey, is this just a criminal who's trying to basically shake you down? And is this one step away from a ransomware attack, or is it something more? And the answer is generally those white hat hackers really are trying to do you a favor. Many of them do ask for money, and that is not an unreasonable thing. They've just spent some time finding vulnerabilities in your system, and they are saving you from more malicious actors finding those same things and exploiting them to a much more significant financial gain. Your organization should take the time to create a responsible disclosure program. So you can put on your website a link to your responsible disclosure program. You tell the folks, this is what we do, this is how we expect you to behave when you find a problem with us. If you don't pay a bug bounty, that's okay. You just need to tell them that you don't pay a bug bounty. Same thing with other kinds of issues that are on the site. If you want to be proactive, you should be telling them in advance how to handle these things. But they're ultimately, that is their goal, is to generate revenue, and in many cases just to try to make the world a better place, because we know that there are bad guys out there trying to extort you, trying to do other things, trying to take those more malicious acts, including the hacktivism. And by taking the steps now to reduce your overall threat footprint and your number of vulnerabilities, you're taking the right steps to help protect yourself and make the world a better place. I know it sounds hokey when I say that, but honestly, we are at a point where we as a nation need to be paying attention to cybersecurity, because we are so interdependent with each other and with our technology that a well-orchestrated attack, there was just an article published recently that said that a well-orchestrated attack that really permeates a good chunk of our society could cost us, I believe it was something like $35 trillion to our economy. That's a massive impact that would take us many years to recover from, if we recover. And so this is a fundamental change. We've all been through the pandemic, and the impacts that has had on us as a nation, and the way we see supply chain issues, we see just our way of life has changed in just these past couple of years. Imagine a well-orchestrated attack that takes those supply chains, instead of it being a 6-month to a year issue to get some of this stuff up and running, we're talking about several years. We're talking about the loss of power plants. We're talking about the loss of water treatment facilities. Imagine the equivalent of a hurricane coming through and wiping out the infrastructure for the majority of our country. These are real issues, and everybody plays a role in them. And so when we talk about why do criminals hack, in some cases, the criminals are looking for access to compute resources. So they're really trying to get access to either your stuff to extort you, or to get access to multiple systems to be able to leverage those to stage bigger attacks. They also might use them for simple things like Bitcoin mining and generating and using your resources without paying you. So thank you very much. You've just helped me earn a couple $100,000 by letting me use your equipment. And all I had to do was take control over it I'm letting you run your business on a daily basis, but in the meantime, I'm siphoning off some of your compute resources. You're paying for the electric for me. Thank you. You're doing a lot of other things that help me make money for myself. And so again, the criminals are looking for just all sorts of opportunities, and in some cases, they're looking to do a whole lot more. So they're trying to get not only access to your resources, but to steal them for Bitcoin mining and for those kinds of purposes, but actually to exfiltrate your information as well. So they're trying to take whatever you have, making it more publicly available. They can leverage your equipment for attacks on third parties. There are all sorts of things that they can grab to try to generate that revenue. Again, whether those are resources that they're using to commit the fraud or commit the crimes, or collecting information to perpetrate those crimes. And fundamentally, I could go back for just a second. Wrong way. One of the best things you can do, I said we're going to try to focus on the practical side of things. One of the best things you can do is to whitelist your software. So understand what software you have in your environment, why it's there, and who needs access to it, and then make sure that it's from a reputable vendor, make sure that it is well maintained, etc. That's critical. You'll hear folks talk about what are called privileged accounts. Most people, when you buy a laptop, when you buy some other piece of equipment, you are logged in as the administrator. You have privileges on that machine, and you have basically unlimited privileges on that machine when you are logged in as the administrator. When software runs as you on your behalf, it has all the rights that you have. That means that software can do pretty much anything to everything on your computer, including accessing it, encrypting it, etc. Taking the time to identify what software you have, like I mentioned, setting up separating out your privileged account, your administrator account from your local user account, the stuff that you need to do on a daily basis. You set those up, you create those secondary accounts. You use the secondary account most of the time to do most of your work, because you don't need the ability to do all the crazy stuff that an administrator can do. When you need it, you log in as the admin, you make whatever changes you need, you log back out, you go back to your secondary account. That's the approach that makes the most sense. One of the things, to tie that back to the whitelisting concept, the reason that you do that is that your secondary account really should not be able to add or remove software from your machine. I know that may sound like a pain. Everybody wants to go grab some piece of software, etc. They want that new thing in their environment. That goes back to the conversation we had before about trust, making sure you understand your supply chain. All of those concepts come into play here. If you can start installing software, A, it could be malware. B, even if it's not malware itself, it may have links to it. It may have other things. The bad actors, because they are able to run as the systems administrator, they can start to install software and make changes to your environment. If you are whitelisting, if you only allow known software to run, that makes life a whole lot easier, because then when the bad guys go to try to install that other piece of software that does the malicious things, your system will automatically detect it, will automatically shut it down and not allow that to happen. So take the time, if you are able, take the time to set that up. You want to make sure that you're doing this, because ultimately the bad guys, as we've talked about before, not only are they looking to commit that ransomware attack, in a traditional ransomware attack, they're not trying to exfiltrate your information. They're simply trying to encrypt it using a special key that only they have access to, and then they sell you the decryption key. And after a while, they threaten to delete that decryption key if they haven't heard from you. That's a traditional ransomware attack. It's highly disruptive. We've seen these things happen in the city of Baltimore. Baltimore was shut down for something like 6 weeks. It cost them something like $20 million to recover from it. There have been several large law firms that were hit and taken offline for multiple days or even weeks. I ran a consulting company for a little while. One of my clients was a law firm. That law firm, as I transitioned out of that consulting role to take my current position, that law firm was the victim of a ransomware attack. So we were still improving their systems, but we did have monitoring in place, and that whitelisting that I mentioned before, their firm decided not to use the whitelisting approach, but rather to monitor the software that was running and look for an alert on new software that was installed in the environment. We got one of those alerts. It was on a Friday night or Saturday morning, and by Sunday, we recognized that it was a ransomware attack that was happening in the system. So I was weaning them off of me, so I was still involved. Recognized that it was a ransomware attack that was happening in their systems. We called their insurance company, and through the day Monday, we talked to the insurance company. By the end of the day, they said just turn everything off. Thankfully, the bad actors were still in the process of figuring out what this entity was, what kinds of information it had, where its primary information. They were really looking for banking and related information. Thankfully, they didn't realize it was a law firm and the kinds of information that this firm had. So they ran a bunch of searches for certain keywords. We could see in the logs that this stuff was happening. The breach counsel came in and said, turn everything off, literally unplug everything. And so that was Monday at 6 o'clock. I got a phone call at 9 o'clock after they had turned everything off that they forgot to write down the name of the insurance company. They needed that, and I happened to have a copy of their insurance policy. And I had a couple people's phone numbers, and senior management didn't have the phone numbers for everyone because they were on the systems that they had turned off. It was highly disruptive. They had to tell their employees not to come to work for, I think it was about 3 days. They had to find alternate ways of responding. This was a firm that predominantly did litigation. The impact on them from a financial perspective was huge. They had to reach out to the court. They had to do several courts. They had to do lots of things to try to mitigate this. The incident response plan that I had written for them, but that had gone untested, now was suddenly being very heavily tested. All of these are things. So some of the advice that I gave earlier are lessons that both are just good business practice, but have also been learned firsthand. So understand that this stuff does happen, and it doesn't have to be. This was a 65-ish lawyer firm, so not a massive firm by any stretch of the imagination. One of their employees went to find a court case and found a PDF copy of something that purported to be that case, and downloaded it. And it was actually from what's called a watering hole site, where they fill that kind of information on a website, and the search results just pop back up. This came up near the top of the list. The attorney actually downloaded that PDF. It was an infected PDF, and that caused all the problems. Proper training of your employees, sensitizing your employees to these risks, making sure that they understand all of this. That's the way to combat these things, and understanding that putting in place whitelisting can help solve some of these issues, because the ransomware would never have been able to be installed on that machine had they done it. Yes, it slows things down, but think about, for that one employee who needs that piece of software, it slows down their ability to deliver for their client. Absolutely, I understand that. But the flip side was that because of that one employee thinking that they might need to eventually maybe install some software at some point, the whole firm was inconvenienced for, it took them 2.5, almost 3 weeks to really get back up and running again. Huge impact for them, impact for their clients. And so you have to make sure that you're looking at this from the right perspective and the big picture. The bad guys know this. The bad guys know that, generally speaking, you're not paying attention to this. You're not thinking about this from the big picture. They're ready to try to extort you. They're trying to make sure that they can disrupt operations, because they know that in the heat of the moment, you're going to be willing to pay a whole lot more money. So how do you defend against these things? Again, that whitelisting is a high level, which I mentioned before, that defense in depth concept. Having your firewall in place on the front end to make sure the bad guys can't get in, absolutely important. Having good antivirus running in your environment, absolutely important, because those are the things that help detect when something malicious is happening. And there are next generation antivirus tools, they call them EDR now, the endpoint detection and response, where not only do they detect that something is happening, they take actions to respond to it as well. And not only are they looking for known bad actors and known bad software, but they're actually looking at the way the software behaves too. And if it does something weird, anomalistic, they actually flag it as anomalies and they start to shut down that software. Really smart to have that in place so that if people jump past your external defenses, like through that PDF file I was talking about, now all of a sudden you have protections in place. But what happens when those protections aren't enough? Well, then you need to make sure you have good backups. Make sure that those backups are working, that they're tested. I will tell you an embarrassing story about me. I ran a system for Congress. When I came on board, that system shut down every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was back in the 1990s when everything was still done on paper, and we were just overloading our system trying to print everything. And so I came in and I made a bunch of architectural changes, and the guy that was there before me had set up tape backup systems, and I could see that it was running, and so I just didn't pay attention to it. And then one day I went to upgrade our email system and I lost everything. I lost all of the emails for an office in Congress. And I was like, I was panicking. I did it. This was a Friday night. I was panicking and pulled up the tape backup because, thank God we run tape backups. And it turned out that the guy who was there before me had not configured it properly, and the tape backup wasn't backing up the emails. And so I lost my office's emails. It was a very humiliating and a just gut wrenching thing to deal with, and to have to go to the head of the office and say, I'm sorry. And it was an office of attorneys, an office of 35 attorneys who wrote legislation for Congress. And I had to tell them that they had to tell their Congress people that they were supporting that they couldn't, they needed to resend the emails to them. It was an awful, awful experience. So make sure you have backups. Make sure that the backups are running. Make sure that you're testing them, that you can actually pull back the information that you need. And again, that incident response plan. Make sure that you have a good incident response plan that's properly tested. What's really cool is some systems that are out there actually have instantaneous or nearly instantaneous backups. Those are wonderful systems. Really encourage you to use them. When we talk about backups, understand that if you are using the cloud, if you're using Microsoft 365 or OneDrive or Box or any of those things, those are things that are connected to your network still, and they are targeted and can be exploited. So I'm sorry to keep telling stories, but I find that they are more memorable that way. I was just talking to a friend of mine who runs a security system for an architecture firm, and his firm was the victim of a ransomware attack. And he was all excited because he knew that he had backups of his information. It was stored in Microsoft 365. And so he went up to his cloud environment and he found that the bad guys knew that cloud environment existed, because they do. They run inventories, they scan your systems, they understand what you have. They had done exactly that to him. They started off by encrypting everything that was up in that remote environment, and then in the cloud, and then came back and did all their local files. So the bad guys know that connected storage exists, and they will leverage that, and they know that you're relying on that. They will take advantage of it. They will try to make it so that they can take control over that information. So make sure you have offline backups. Make sure that you're doing these things on a periodic basis so that you can properly recover when stuff happens. And then when they do these things, the whole point of doing the extortion is to not only are they doing the ransomware, but again, in ransomware 2.0, now what they're doing is actually exfiltrating that information as well and leveraging that to embarrass you. And they'll do that slow drip of information. You'll see this if you read the news. Sadly, I spend a lot of my time reading about other companies that have been hacked. You'll see how there was a ransomware, a ransom was claimed, and so the bad guys are saying, "Hey, you got to pay us," and then they'll say, "Okay, and you need to start start paying us now, or we're going to start publishing portions of that information." And they will even publish some of it as a sample set to prove that they actually have the information and that they will leak it. So how do you defend against that kind of scenario? Well, you make sure that you have backups. We talked about that before. And then you also want to make sure that you have your data properly encrypted. And there are what's called encryption at rest and encryption in motion. Encryption at rest means that the files are encrypted on your hard drive. And that's at the drive level, but also at the file level. You need to make sure the individual files, especially if they have highly sensitive information in them, that they are properly encrypted as well. Your IT teams should be able to do that for you. If you are trying to do this stuff yourself, this can be a bit of a challenge. One of the easiest ways to do it is to create a zip file, a compressed copy of it that has a password associated with it. You're taking some steps to make it harder for the bad guys to get into it. Just remember that if you use that password protected zip file, not to store that password in clear text on that same hard drive, because the bad guys have access to it. Put it somewhere else that's also encrypted. If you have a password manager, I strongly encourage you to get a password manager. If you don't have one, put the password in the password manager. Now it's someplace that's disconnected from your systems. So if the bad guys get access to it, again, they're not going to have direct access to that password. You do need to make sure that you're managing that encryption key properly. I mentioned before encryption at rest. You also have encryption in motion. Make sure that you have your IT teams, again, can ensure that as you are sending stuff, even in your internal network, that you are sending it encrypted the whole way through. The bad guys love to establish a footprint and change your network to what's called promiscuous mode, where they can hear and see everything that's traveling across the network, or a good chunk of what's traveling across the network. And they can grab anything that's not encrypted. So you want to make sure that you're using encryption at rest, so that if they get to a file, they have to have the password to get to it. Encryption at rest at the disk level, so that if you leave your laptop or other device somewhere else, that they need the password in order to be able to unlock and decrypt that hard drive. And then encryption in motion, making sure that the communications across the internet are properly encrypted as well. Again, this all goes back to making sure that you understand what you're doing and making sure that you're protecting things properly to meet your ethical obligations, because this is core, this is critical to properly using technology today. And then fundamentally, those role-based access controls are a great way to help reduce the bad guy's ability to move from one machine to another. That's the stuff that I mentioned a minute ago, where you're not the local administrator on your machine on a day-to-day basis. You have that secondary account that has much more limited restrictions, much more limited permissions. When you can't do things and the bad guys are acting as you, they can't do them either. So the more steps you can take to make it hard, again, that defense in depth concept, the more steps you can take to make it hard for the bad guys to do their thing, the better it is, the more secure you're going to be. Remember, I mentioned before about ransomware payments. The Office of Foreign Asset Control at the Treasury Department came out with a statement a couple years ago talking about those ransoms. As I mentioned, this is stuff that nation states are using to fund their nations. In some cases, terrorist organizations are using these ransomware attacks to fund their terror operations. We make it really easy for them to do that. Putting in place good cyber helps actually keep the nation and the world safe at a whole different level when you think about it that way. And so the Office of Foreign Asset Control has said that OFAC may impose civil penalties for sanctions violations based on strict liability, meaning that a person subject to U.S. jurisdiction may be held civilly liable even if that person did not know or have reason to know that it was engaging in a transaction with a person that is prohibited under sanctions laws. So if you pay a ransom and it turns out that the person that you paid that ransom to is someone in a terrorist organization, you can still get hit with fines and penalties. So ransomware payments benefit illicit actors and can undermine the national security and foreign policy objectives of the United States. For this reason, license applications involving ransomware payments demanded as a result of malicious cyber actor will be reviewed by OFAC on a case-by-case basis with a presumption of denial. So if you are hit with a ransom attack and you know that the ransom organization is a foreign entity, and it is often they will tell you who they are because they want the notoriety that goes along with it, because then it scares subsequent victims into complacency and compliancy much quicker. Or into compliance much quicker. So the idea is they'll tell you who they are again, so the notoriety spreads. If you can trace that back to a bad actor, you are supposed to a criminal group that is on that OFAC list. You need to make sure that you're reporting this to OFAC, and they may deny your ability to pay that ransom. So again, things to really think about as part of your incident response plan. That incident response plan should be taking these kinds of ransom payments into account, and knowing, will you pay at all, or will you suck it up, kind of like I had to when I was at Congress, and just say we're sorry and we made a mistake, and unfortunately this is the road that we're the role that we're going to play, and the path that you find yourselves on, because we won't pay the ransom. That can be a very, very difficult conversation to have internally. It can be a very difficult conversation to have with your clients. And so you've got to decide, are you going to do the right thing or not? The bad guys also are coming in to try to commit espionage and foster political unrest. We talked before about the Mossack Fonseca, but then Jones Day was the victim of an attack a couple of years ago, and the reason that they were attacked was because they were representing the Trump campaign. And so again, this isn't just political unrest in foreign countries. They're trying to foment political unrest here in the U.S. as well. Love him or hate him, the president is a highly polarizing figure, and the information that he would share with his firm is certainly something that folks would find very damning. And so as a law firm, understanding that these bad guys are here trying to do these things, it's really important that you're taking the appropriate steps to protect yourselves, protect your clients. And it's not just you. So in some cases, the bad guys are trying to do what's called island hopping. So they're using you not just for the information that you have and the ability to steal your information and steal your money, but actually to go one step further and to use you as a stepping stone toward a much bigger prize. So your clients have, in some cases, even more valuable information than you have, and they know that the bad guys know that by getting to you, they can then do account takeovers and other things. And even though your clients have put in place lots of protections to help keep their stuff safe, they know that trying to swim in that sea is going to get them hurt. But by using you, you can become a bridge, and you can become the way that they get to that information, to get to that prize ultimately, and not be swimming with the sharks. So this happened in California a few years ago. There was a construction company that does work for the local utility companies. They were actually a couple tiers down. They were a subcontractor of a subcontractor. The Russian entities, so threat actors who were aligned with the Russian government, identified that this construction company played that role, and they started probing that construction company. they were able to establish a point of presence in the system to the point where they could send and receive emails on behalf of an employee there who is an upper middle management employee. They again took control of his email address, used it as the launching point for sending malicious malware to some of the upstream contractors, and kept working their way up. Their control over his email was so strong that they would send out these pieces of malware. Somebody would respond and say, "Wait, I wasn't expecting this from you," or "This doesn't sound like you. Is this really you sending the email?" And it's going back to the legitimate email address. And the bad actor would say, "Yep, it's me. Please do open this. We need the invoice processed right away." And so, of course, then the recipient would open it and actually take action. And uh, the bad guys just kept using this as that island hopping, as that stepping stone to get to the bigger actors, including getting onto the electrical grid, which is actually disconnected from the internet. But they were able to hop their way up onto a laptop that eventually got plugged into the electrical grid, and were basically days away from being able to take out the electrical grid for the west coast of the United States. Thankfully, they were caught in time, but these are real problems, real attacks that happen. And again, you really don't want to be that construction company. Your firm really doesn't want to be the thing that helps create the political downfall of the United States. Taking the time to put in place good cyber programs that are at least reasonable given the nature of the information that you handle and the risks that you face are really important. So how do the bad guys get in? How does this stuff happen? For the most part, it happens through either phishing or phishing related things, brute force attacks, or their ability to exploit vulnerabilities. So phishing and spear phishing, we've talked a little bit about those before. Phishing is just the fraudulent attempt to obtain sensitive information such as usernames, passwords, credit card details, etc., by disguising as a trustworthy entity in an electronic communication. You're casting a really broad net and just hoping somebody falls for it. Spear phishing is a targeted form of phishing. In spear phishing, what you're doing is you're doing a lot of opposition research essentially and finding out lots of information about your target and finding a very specific path to get in. Both of them can be effective. Spear phishing can be highly effective. As a professor at Drexel, I spear phished my class. I created a website called drexel.email, and I sent my students an email congratulating them on participating at Drexel as students, and said that, we're about to launch a new email service for alumni. Here's where you go to sign up. And I had several students who passed, who failed that phishing test. They fell for it and actually gave me their usernames and passwords for their Drexel systems. I did not ask for their password, but for some reason they felt compelled to give me that information, which was really scary. So how do you defend against these things? You need to make sure that you have good scanning in place to look at your emails, chats, texts, etc., for malicious attachments and links. You need to make sure that you are educating your employees. If you don't have phishing tests going on, if you're not running regular phishing awareness for your employees, you need to start doing that. There are some people that are pushing back against that high level of sensitivity. I have found that even in my organization, people still fall for this stuff. So even though we run these tests regularly, and even though we do hold our employees accountable for when they fail, some of these things are really well done, and they do fall for them. Having that increased level of sensitivity, even to the point where legitimate things aren't making it through, is not really a bad thing. Again, go back to the story about the law firm and how long they were offline. That little bit of inconvenience, and that little bit of inconvenience for your customer, believe me, your customers are all getting very, very aware that that they're trusting you with sensitive information. And if you're taking just a moment and asking them to validate that something is legitimate, most of your customers are actually going to appreciate that and appreciate the security consciousness that you're exhibiting. And then ultimately, that whitelisting that we talked about before, making sure that you have antivirus software that's running uninterrupted, making sure that you have other things that are there to measure and monitor what's going on in your environment. In the interest of time, I'm not going to play this video. You can download it. There was a fascinating study. This woman, I showed you her picture before. She is a hacker. Her big approach is social engineering. That's what's called phishing. Phishing is voice phishing. And what she does is call companies and try to put some pressure on the employees to grant her access that she shouldn't otherwise have. So in this video, a journalist hires her to vish him. She says, "Okay, well, how about if we attack your cell phone company? I'm going to try to get access to your cell phone account." And so in a matter of about 5 minutes, she is able to take complete control over his account, changes his password, adds herself to it, begins getting some of his text messages and a whole bunch of other things, all by just playing a baby crying in the background and pretending to be a harrowed wife, newlywed, who's trying to help her husband out while he's dealing with some other issues. She plays that social emotional card really well. She's very effective, and I love the video. It's scary, and I hate her for doing it, but she is very effective in it, and it just underscores why training your employees is so important. And again, not just the folks who are doing your call center, but other people who may receive these calls as well, understanding how to validate who the person is, that they're authorized to ask for the changes that are being requested, and that they're authorized to authorize those changes. Really important. Making sure that everybody's trained properly, and then good policies, making sure that everybody again is trained to follow those policies, and ultimately enforcing those policies. The employee at the cell phone company who allowed this stuff to happen should at a minimum be subject to retraining, and in some cases, given the nature of the risk, that employee probably should be terminated. So making sure that you know and that you're following your rules is really important. The other things that people will do is credential stuffing. So the bad guys, you hear about all these breaches all the time, and how usernames, passwords, and email addresses are all part of the pool of stuff that was stolen. Those passwords, people reuse passwords all the time. So they have your username, they have your password, and they have your email address. 9 times out of 10, your your username is your email address. So they can log into all these different websites as you if you reuse your password. When Disney Plus first launched a couple years ago, Disney, within a couple days, there were usernames and passwords for Disney Plus that were available on the dark web. And people in the security industry were just dumbfounded that Disney would launch a service that had such inherent security flaws that as to 2 or 3 days later, literally, that these usernames and passwords were showing up. What turned out was the case was that the bad guys were running all the usernames and passwords from previous breaches against Disney, and they were able to find accounts that people were reusing those passwords from one program to another, or one system to another. And so that password reuse enables the bad guys to log in as you across multiple different platforms. So don't reuse passwords, don't reuse your logins, don't use common passwords. So now again, with those breaches, they have dictionaries of thousands, millions of common passwords. Don't use those. Use longer, more complex passwords, so they can't just guess your password. A 6-character password is not a good password. Even an 8-character password, even with upper and lower case and special characters and all the other good stuff that's supposed to go into a password, that is not long enough anymore. You need to have long pass phrases, not just a password, but 2 or 3 words that are strung together. And this is where, again, those password managers that I mentioned before, use them because they really, really help. They allow you to not use the same password everywhere. I have I have them both on the personal level as well as the company where I work. We use one, and I don't have the same password for anything. But I also don't have to remember all, I think it's about 400 passwords that I manage. I don't have to remember any of them. All I have to remember are the 2 passwords that I use to get into those password managers. Everything else is managed by those managers. Makes things a whole lot easier. And then multi-factor authentication. If you don't have that already in your organization, you really should be using MFA pretty much everywhere. That's the special several character long code that changes on a regular basis. Sometimes they will text them to you. That is not really the best approach. Text-based is certainly better than nothing, but it is very easy to clone cell phones and to get copies of the stuff that's texted to you. So probably not the best use of multi-factor authentication. The better approach is the applications that you can download and install on your phone, or the best is really like a YubiKey or another physical device that you plug into your computer. Those are really the best ways to do multi-factor authentication, but anything is better than nothing. Microsoft had a survey a couple of years ago that showed that about 95, I think, or 99% of their recent attacks would have been thwarted had their users put in place multi-factor authentication. So really important, really easy, simple step to put in place. It's not hard to do, and it really just makes life a whole lot better for you and makes it harder for the bad guys. And then fundamentally, you have exploited vulnerability. So the bad guys will scan your systems. I talked before about how those scans happen within a couple minutes of your system being online. And what they're doing is looking for software, looking for things that are either misconfigured or that are old, and that have vulnerabilities in them. So make sure that you're running your patches on a regular basis. I know it never fails. My system wants to reboot for some odd reason at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which is always when I'm running a webinar or I'm doing something else, and it wants to do that. You do need to make sure that you are running those patches. It doesn't have to be right in the moment generally, but it should be at the end of that day. It needs to be happening really soon. And do that on your phone, do that on every device that you have. Make sure that you have automatic updates enabled. I will tell you that back in the day, when I used to run systems, we didn't generally install those updates on a regular basis because they were highly disruptive. Half the time stuff would break, etc. That doesn't happen that often anymore. And again, when you look at it from a risk perspective and a likelihood perspective, the likelihood that an unpatched system will be breached is significantly higher than the likelihood that an unpatched system will cause problems or that the patch will cause problems for you. So really important, make sure you're getting that stuff installed as early and as quickly as possible. You want to make sure that your end of life hardware and software is taken offline. So everything has some life expectancy associated with it. Companies will no longer provide hardware updates or software updates, etc. You need to make sure that you are taking that stuff offline, not continuing to use it, because there are vulnerabilities that are years, in fact, in some cases, decades old, that the bad guys are continuing to use to get into these systems. So get that stuff offline, make sure that you're not continuing to use it. Don't bring unauthorized equipment into your environment. Don't bring anything that's not managed into the environment. And that includes things like other computers, Wi-Fi networks. I had an employee at a previous job who actually brought his own Wi-Fi router into his office because he wanted to get his phone on our system, and it just created all sorts of issues. So don't bring that stuff in. Make sure that you're monitoring your network to know what you have on your network, so everything is properly managed. And that includes things like your smart devices, your smart TVs and other devices that you're bringing into your firm. If you're setting it up in the conference room, make sure you know that it's there. Make sure that you're putting it on a separate network to keep things isolated and reduce your overall risk. And there's a bunch of other things too that you should either be doing or not doing. So Keep that client information only on firm equipment. Don't put it on your personal mobile device unless that mobile device is managed by the firm. Stop and think before you click on any link. That's fundamental, right? We've talked about phishing and other things a lot in this. Be suspicious of all attachments and emails from strangers and even from friends. Be very suspicious of anything before you open it. And use your work email only for work. If you're starting to get emails from Amazon or some other place because you placed an order using that work email, unsubscribe from those lists. Make sure you limit the information that's coming into your environment. And then you want to limit the use of work equipment for personal purposes. Again, if that Amazon order was placed for personal purposes, you really don't want to use your work machines for that. Multi-factor authentication, we talked about. Software and equipment patched and updated. We've talked about encrypting things, and that includes encrypting your portable media. So if you put stuff on a USB drive, or if you're still using old school CD-ROMs, make sure that you are encrypting the files that are on those. There are USB drives that are encrypted by default. I encourage you, if you need to use those, go get one of those. Make sure that you're encrypting everything. On the don't side, don't share accounts. So we talked before about the using a different username and password for every one of your accounts. If you're sharing an account with someone else, now that creates accountability issues, because they may do something that even though it's not them, they create a security risk, and now that ties back to you, and it's hard to tell where that breach came from, where the threats came from. So really take the time to think about who has access to your systems. If you're at a law firm, that means that your assistant can't do stuff as you. Your assistant is doing stuff as them. They can still sign stuff on your behalf, but internal to your IT systems, they need to have their own accounts so that you have that separation of duties. You have traceability back to who was the source of whatever the problem is.
Hey,
Don't
James.
reuse the password. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm just going to throw up the third password. It'll be on in the background. You can keep going. You've been on a great roll, so I didn't want to interrupt. But you can keep going through the slide deck. For everyone else, the password's going to be up for the next 15 seconds.
And so make sure you don't have any uninstall. That you uninstall your unauthorized software and don't install any unauthorized software. Don't use public Wi-Fi. I am a big advocate for not using public Wi-Fi. There are so many vulnerabilities in there. You're going to Starbucks or going to some other places and using their Wi-Fi is just a really, really bad idea. Unless you're using a very well managed device, there are some exceptions to that rule, but as a general rule, stay off those systems. Don't install smart devices. Think about allowing outside devices on your home or firm network. You really want to think very carefully about that. That means that, like at my house, I have a guest Wi-Fi system, so when people come over, they're on the guest, not on my network with my managed systems. Think carefully before you buy any generic cyber insurance. Many of them are written for organizations that probably don't look like you. Most of the cyber insurance today is written more for the Amazons and online retailers than for a law firm. Make sure if you're buying cyber insurance that it has the right coverage for you. And think carefully before assuming that your IT staff is doing all of this. Your IT staff's job is to keep your systems up and running and to handle all the stupid user stuff that happens with desktop tech support. They are generally not cyber people. Unless your firm is paying them to pay attention to cyber, they are probably not paying attention to cyber. I will pause there because we are almost at the top of the hour. Thank you for the reminder, Josh. And so one other thing to think about is to consider third-party assessments. That CMMC program that I mentioned before, if your firm is handling a lot of sensitive information, there are third-party assessors out there who can come in, do gap assessments to help you understand what vulnerabilities or other problems you might have, give you a list of things to remediate in the environment, and then ultimately you can actually get a third party to come in and issue a certification for you as well. So I apologize for running a little long, but if there are any questions, you can pop them up in the chat and I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for today's program, James. I personally learned a lot, and I feel like I need to change all of my passwords now. We do have one final password for today's session, and I'm going to throw that up now. Like James just mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. If you think of a question after today, you can email me at joshpina@publiccontractinstitute.com, and I can get that over to over to James. This is our final password. Just a reminder, you want to have written all these passwords down. We will have one final poll after this. And then when you leave today, you'll have a survey. And that survey is just going to ask if there's any other programs you would like to see. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, James, for putting together such an informative session on cybersecurity for lawyers. This is our final poll. And it is just please rate this session excellent, very good, good, or fair. If you have any feedback about today's session, if you want to know just what programs James will be on in the future, the next time he'll be covering cybersecurity, if you want to get some other people to join for that, feel free to email me at joshpina@publiccontractinginstitute.com. Again, thank you everyone for joining today, and thank you, James, for putting this together.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.